Why does the United States support Israel? Well, there's a history, and a very interesting one. It actually goes back a long time. One thing to remember is that Christian Zionism is a very powerful force, which goes back long before Jewish Zionism. In England, particularly, Christian Zionism was a powerful force among British elites. It's part of the motivation for the Balfour Declaration and for Britain's support for Jewish colonization of Israel. Remember, the Bible said, and that's a big part of British elite culture. Same in the United States. Woodrow Wilson was a devout Christian who read the Bible every day. So did Harry Truman. In the Roosevelt administration, one of the leading officials, Harold Ickes, once described the return of the Jews to Palestine as the greatest event in history. It's realizing the lesson of the Bible. These are deeply religious countries in which the biblical commands, so-called, are taken quite literally. Also, this is just part of colonization. This is the last phase of European colonization. And notice that the countries that are most strongly in support of Israel are not just the United States. It's the United States, Australia, and Canada, the offshoots of England, Anglosphere sometimes called, unusual forms of imperialism. These are settler colonial societies, societies in which not like India, not like the British in India, say, societies, South Africa was a little like this, or Algeria under the French. Settler colonial societies in which the settlers came in, essentially eliminated the native population, also driven by religious principles, very religious groups driven by Christian Zionism.
And so Israel and the United States and Saudi Arabia created ISIS. And millions of Syrians are homeless. Thousands of Christians died. Thousands of them died.
Yes.
Churches that went back to the first century were destroyed. Pastors beheaded. Christians crucified. And America's evangelical Christian leaders sat on their butts and did nothing. Never said a word. Never challenged the official narrative. All they did was just make sure that political support was for Israel. And yet Israel was arming ISIS.
Arming, funding, and providing medical support.
All you Christian Zionists, you have blood on your hands. You got blood on your hands, Christian Zionists. You're going to be held accountable for it someday, Judgment Day, if you don't repent. You got blood on your hands, the blood of innocent Christians who were killed by the weapons supplied by your Zionists in Israel.
On my father's side,
the Jews did not take arms against the
my
Germans.
late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it is precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's been done.
You mentioned Palestine earlier, and we had one of our listeners and viewers had a question about that, and I think I might as well just ask it. Sure. He stated that, this is from Ariel Spivkovsky, I think he lives in New York City, and he was talking about Israel, and he stated, Israel is the only country in the Middle East with a true democracy, equal rights for women, gays, Arabs, and Muslims. Then he goes on to say, Hezbollah and Iran are today supporting Bashar Assad while he massacres his own people. And when I say supporting, I mean they are participating in the fighting. Are they still freedom fighters?
Well, there are a number of faults with the thesis, which I need to start with. Israel is a democracy for Jews, but it's not a democracy for the millions of non-Jews, Muslims and Christians who live under their military occupation. It's not a democracy if you're an Arab Israeli, because if you belong to or support or want to vote for a political party which challenges the essence of the state, you're not allowed to. And the political leaders from the so-called Israeli Arab community are scattered around the globe now in exile, one of them here in London, as a testament to that. Thirdly, there's nothing very democratic about being the biggest international lawbreaker in the world. Indeed, Israel is in defiance of more United Nations Security Council resolutions than all the other countries in the entire world put together.
Is this mostly nuclear arm related?
Nuclear weapons, occupying other people's countries, refusing to leave them, building illegal settlements on occupied territory, transferring population in occupied territory. There are, I've lost count now, but it's in 3 figures, so it's hundreds of international laws that Israel has been convicted of breaking, and many, many others where the conviction was prevented by the veto of the United States in the Security Council. So if it were not for that veto, those hundreds would be thousands. So there's nothing very democratic about that.
We'll start tonight in the Middle East, where Israel...
What? Israel isn't supposed to defend itself?
Oh, yeah, if Mexico bombed Texas, will we exercise
restraint? What other countries held to the same standard as Israel? People that want to destroy her terrorists?
4,000 years later, we're the only democracy in the Middle East, you
self-hating Jew?
That was weird. Anyway, what I was saying was last Thursday saw the start of a new ground offensive launched by Israel.
Tradition!
This time it's about Israel and how they are treating the territories in the Gaza Strip. After the 2008 pounding that the Gaza took, they, of course, did a blockade, etc., in that area. And we, had a sense that the Israelis were trying to limit things coming in, not just to prevent terrorism, but almost as a collective punishment to make sure that the people in Gaza did not get economically healthy or anything along those lines. Those suspicions have now been confirmed. These are cables that the American diplomats wrote back home as to what the true Israeli intentions are. Here is one of them. It says in 2008, as part of their overall embargo plan against Gaza, Israeli officials have confirmed to the U.S. Embassy economic officers on multiple occasions that they intend to keep the Gazan economy on the brink of collapse without quite pushing it over the edge. So the idea is, let's keep these guys prisoners. We control their borders. Let's keep them on the brink of economic collapse. To me, that's hideous. It's, as I said, it's collective punishment. It's saying, I don't care who's firing the rockets, even though actually they've already crushed them. And at that point, almost no one is firing rockets. I don't care. I'm going to crush you until what? Maybe because I want to have an advantage in negotiations. If you're that desperate and you can't feed your family, maybe I'll get something better out of you in negotiations. And by the way, this was Ehud Olmert's government, which is actually less conservative than the current Israeli government. But that's not all. In January of 2008, one more thing from the cables. They said they want the coastal territory economy, quote, functioning at the lowest level possible, consistent with avoiding a humanitarian crisis. Like, we want it just a shade above humanitarian crisis. And by the way, remember when the Turkish ship came in, the Mavi Marmara, and they tried to end the blockade, which was keeping them at near catastrophic levels? The Israelis said, oh, no, this has nothing to do with keeping the people of Gaza down or destroying their economy. No, we're just trying to make sure that they don't get materials that they could use in terrorism. You see this? It was a lie. A flat-out lie.
What we have seen today in Gaza was a horrifying display of the use of excessive force and lethal force. Of course, Israel has a long history of using excessive force against Palestinian protesters, but what we have seen today was extremely disproportionate and horrifying. They've been shooting live high-velocity bullets at protesters who do not pose imminent threat in violation of international law. We're extremely concerned that Israel is pursuing a policy of deliberately inflicting life-changing injuries. The sheer number of people who have been shot with live ammunition, as well as the type of injuries that we are seeing, point to the fact that Israel may be attempting to inflict life-changing injury. There are concrete steps that states can take, and that should include, first of all, imposing an arms embargo, and then suspending all arms and equipment, military equipment, to Israel in order to ensure that these are not used in order to commit serious violations.
To entertain the people who shot the feet of Palestinian footballers. Yeah, there's two kids, 18-year-olds, they'd been to the local football stadium pitch to train, dreamed of playing at some point for Palestine, and some IDF soldiers decided to shoot. They shot one kid 7 times in one foot, 4 times in another. So obviously they'll never play soccer, but they'll never walk again. Oh, you know, I'm a musician, I just want to play my music. I don't want Roger Waters bullying me. What? They're shooting the fucking feet of 18-year-olds who want to play soccer. Don't talk to me about your freedom of speech. Pay attention. I mean, I do care about it passionately, but I don't have to live there. I'm not a Palestinian. I don't get my door kicked. I don't get my door kicked in every night by whoever wants to. In Palestine, this happens to people constantly, and even to children, as we've seen recently, with Ahmed Tamimi. Do we believe in law or not? Do we consider that human beings, individual human beings, have...
The occupation is destroying everything. The Palestinians are becoming more depressed, desperate. With that desperation, most likely there's going to be more violence because they have no other way of expressing themselves. On the Israeli side, you see what's happening to these young soldiers. And they're doing things they don't want to do. They're seeing things they shouldn't see. And the violence that's coming from the Israeli side is something that's destroying Jewish soul. So I see both sides, both cultures being destroyed in this process. And I don't see leaders on either side who are speaking the will and the needs of their people.
As far as the embassy moving to Jerusalem, I'd love to see that happen.
I mean, he talked about moving the embassy U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, which is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard of in the middle of a conflict like this. You know, he hired an ambassador who is now going to be the ambassador to Israel, who is one of the supporters of settlements. At the same time, he told Netanyahu to slow down the settlements. I don't think we know where this is going to settle in terms of a policy. This doesn't seem to be an administration that starts from policy, weaning them completely incompetent ways at the beginning.
Huge problem.
What about the children in the schools?
Sick.
About a month and a half now, and this is definitely the most difficult situation that I've ever seen. In the time that I've been here, children have been shot and killed. On the 30th of January, the Israeli military bulldozed the 2 largest water wells, destroying over half of Rafah's water supply. Every few days, if not every day, houses are demolished here. People are economically devastated because of the closure of the borders into Egypt and the extreme control of the Gazan economy by Israel. I came to look at the aftermath of a place where 25 greenhouses had been demolished on the other side of Rafah, destroying the livelihoods of about 300 people, and that had taken place while they rounded up about 150 men, held them under a sniper tower, and shot around them to contain the men, the farmers in the area. So I feel like what I'm witnessing here is a very systematic destruction of people's ability to survive, and that is incredibly horrifying. It's incredibly horrifying. Sometimes it takes a while for it to set in what is happening here, because I think many of the people here, they try to maintain what they can of their lives, and I don't know, maybe it has to do with protecting their children, that they try to be happy, joke with their children. So sometimes it takes time to it's hard to hold in your mind, the complete reality of what's happening here. Sometimes I'm sitting down to dinner with people and I just realize that that there is a massive military machine surrounding them and trying to kill these people that I'm having dinner with, these families that I'm sitting down to eat with, and who are being very generous and kind to me, and their children here who are incredibly threatened, living lives that no child ever should have to live, and so I feel a lot of horror. Really, I feel a lot of horror about the situation. The current Israeli government, I don't have a great deal of faith that they're going to listen to any message from me. I think it has become clear that this government does not care about the safety of its own people and doesn't care at all about the lives of Palestinian people. I think it's ridiculous that my government supports this government and refers to Ariel Sharon as a man of peace. It's clear to me, being here, that Ariel Sharon is invested in perpetuating a cycle of, perpetuating violence. I think calling it a cycle of violence disregards the imbalance of power in the situation, and people's lives here are almost completely controlled by the Israeli government. And it's amazing that people are able to hold on to their humanity as much as they have.
Why do you think the removal of Saddam hasn't improved the lives of Iraqis? Or has it? I don't know.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Oil, securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans, which made clear that the balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yanan's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
الله أكبر.
And this long-term goal is part of the Greater Israel Project. So in terms of the sectarian divide you see happening in Iraq today, it's actually all part of a very well-designed plan to try and secure the goal, this fantasy goal of the Greater Israel Project.
Okay, but why would Israel benefit from an unstable Middle East, an unstable Arab nations? Because what we see that this instability actually is followed by fundamental Islam, and people who are overthrown are either replaced by fundamentalist powers, or there's just more sectarian violence that grows.
Yes, and it would seem on the surface from a sane point of view that everything is going wrong. But in fact, when you fracture a country along sectarian divide, ultimately you weaken the country. What the last thing that Israel or the United States wants is a strong Nasser-type leader, an Arab nationalist who will seriously ensure that the resources of that country are taken and protected and used for the benefit of the people. That's the last thing that the empire wants and that Israel wants. So while you have these religious fundamentalist nutcases who are running around bombing and doing all sorts of stuff like that, you have a weakened, fractured country in Iraq, and that is the prerequisite for ultimately expanding Israel into the fantasy of the Greater Israel Project. It doesn't seem sane, and it's not sane, because those who are trying to carry out these agendas are pure and simple psychopaths.
In a refugee camp your whole life because the Israeli Jews took your land, and you've been trapped in a refugee camp. Your only food comes from humanitarian refugee assistance like the UN, And now President Trump, at the behest of the Zionists, cuts off all of the food. Where do you get your food now? Where do you get it? You're trapped in a refugee camp, and there's no food going to be sent in. Listen, the Jews are getting ready for the final solution of the Palestinian people. They want to eradicate them. I'm telling you, Doc, if they get their way, they're going to eradicate the Palestinians. That's where this is going. I know that sounds extreme, but what they're doing is extreme. If Benjamin Netanyahu got his way, he would eradicate the Palestinian people. The early Zionists said that they had to eradicate the Arabs. The
Israelis have been time wasting since 1948. They pretended that they were going to go along with the UN mandate that there should be 2 states. If they were having a state, that there should be a Palestinian state as well. But they never had any intention of not taking over the whole thing. From 1948 on, they have been systematically making life on the earth that is Palestine intolerable for the indigenous people in an attempt to drive them into neighboring countries, into refugee camps, so that they can take over the whole.
Ahmadinejad of Iran is supposed to be the great demon of all Jewish people. Look at it! The demonization comes from Rothschild Zionism. We've been totally misled about what it is. Rothschild dynasty created Israel. It paid for the first people out of Europe to go and people Israel after the war. It paid for the building of the Knesset. It paid for the building of the Supreme Court building with all its Illuminati symbols all over it. And some of the people who've broken out of the family, I quote one of them in my book, have actually said, and as I've been saying for years, because it's bloody obvious, that Israel is not the homeland of Jewish people. It is the fiefdom of the Rothschild dynasty, created out of Rothschild Zionism, a secret society. And Rothschild Zionism has been used via Israel to devastate, slaughter, torture an entire nation of human beings, while claiming to be against terrorism. This is the dictionary definition of genocide: the systematic and widespread extermination or attempted extermination of an entire national, racial, religious or ethnic group. Never can what is happening in Palestine and Gaza have been described so accurately. More and more people killed through war, killed through bombing attacks, killed through shootings, killed through lack of food and adequate medical care. Gaza, the most crowded piece of land on earth, is little more, ironically, than a concentration camp. And the world looks on. This is the face of Palestine. Well, tell me what you see. Combat boots. Yeah, another terrorist 5-year-old.